Dudleytown lies in the hills of northwest Connecticut, veiled in the permanent shadow of thick forest and looming landscape, located deep within an eternal dust that scares even woodland creatures. There's little left of the small settlement now. Its wooded surroundings, dark and still, have turned what was a town into abandoned ruins which only the brave of heart and obstinately curious bother to visit. Established by a man named Thomas Griffiths in 1739, Dudleytown was one of those American villages that never really became what its founders might have hoped. Another ghost town among the countless abandoned communities pockmarked across the United States. Dudleytown has long since fallen prey to the encroaching wilderness. The old buildings that used to house stubborn 18th century frontiersmen have been reduced to crumbling foundations overgrown with moss and weed. The cellar holes of those homes are now damp caverns in the ground where centipedes and rodents live among the winding tree roots that break out of the underground walls, floor, and ceiling. But Dudleytown is hardly just another ghost town slowly succumbing to the forces of nature. One visit to the long deserted community is all it takes to realize that something is very wrong in that virtuous stretch of wilderness. There's a distinct, intangible sense that people don't belong, that the woods would rather be left undisturbed to brood over some mysterious secret. Some have felt it as a heavy weight on the chest, as if an enormous hand is tightening its grip around individuals' lungs, squeezing the breath out of hapless visitors. Others talk about the leaden stillness in and around Dudleytown, where not a hare, squirrel, or vole make a sound. The stillness is such that there are those who believe that wildlife avoid the place altogether, instinctively shunning the ominous wood out of some deeper wisdom humans cannot grasp. Given the eventual fate of many of those who attempted to settle in the area, pioneers would have done better if they were imbued with the same wisdom. For the horrific history of Dudleytown only confirms the dreadful feel in the air around the village ruins. Murder, insanity, strange sightings on the edge of town, vanishing townsfolk, suicides, epidemics, and freakish deaths. Those who moved to the cursed settlement in the woods were visited with a morbid plethora of lethal difficulties. Only after Dudleytowners packed up and left, virtually driven out by these rampant hostile forces, did the tragedies abate, replaced by the eerie silence that reigns over the area today. The long string of tragedies that made up the Chronicle of Dudleytown began in August 1774, about 35 years after the town was settled. An unknown illness swept through the home of a settler by the name of Adoniram Carter, infecting his entire family. The entire house was bedridden for about a week, until the strange disease claims them all in the same day. It is still not clear what they died from. The dismal march of death and insanity in Dudleytown had begun. Adoniram's brother Nathaniel was as grief-ridden as he was frightened by the sudden demise of his brother's household, and he moved his wife and children from Dudleytown to New York. They had not been in their new home long when Indians raided their farm, killing Nathaniel, his wife, and one of his children. The Indian marauders took the other three children as prisoners. A few years later, Revolutionary General Heman Swift would be the next town resident to deal with a mortal tragedy. Swift's wife was standing on their front porch during a stormy day when she was struck by lightning, killed in a flashing instant on her very doorstep. While anyone would expect General Swift to be affected by such a sudden and meaningless death of a loved one, his transformation after the loss of his wife made many uneasy. Not long after Mrs. Swift was buried, the general began to rant about strange shapes in the woods, horrible hoofed monsters that moved swiftly, only stopping long enough to leer at him through the dense foliage. It was at this time that settlers' livestock began to mysteriously disappear without a trace. General Swift was seen on many nights standing by himself on the edge of town, stiff as a statue, staring intently into the dark forest. There were nights when he would not move until the sun began to rise. Everyone believed that he had gone mad. Dementia was a common problem in Dudleytown. Over the course of its history, there were numerous accounts of villagers suddenly slipping into states of paranoid delusion, chronic distraction, or indolent torpor. The sounds and shadows of the surrounding woods claimed the minds of many, an all too frequent indicator that another resident had fallen into insanity was an obsessive interest in what was transpiring in the surrounding trees. During particularly dark times, one could find a handful of townsfolk standing at the forest's edge, staring blankly at some unknown sight within. Tales of these strange going-ons in the small town of Dudleytown began to spread. People in nearby Cornwall whispered about a curse hanging over the isolated town. There was talk of the town being built over a Mohawk burial ground. Many believed that the spirits of disconsolate Indians were responsible for the evil that was transpiring in town. Others believed that living, breathing Mohawks were largely responsible for the unfortunate events that were occurring. Years passed, and life remained as difficult as ever in the small town in the hills. No farms could be planted on the rocky ground. Livestock disappeared regularly, and people, as well, had a disturbing tendency to simply vanish. In 1892, madness claimed another town resident, John Brophy, after his young wife died suddenly and his two children disappeared into the woods, never to be found again. The stories started to discourage people from settling in Dudleytown. Throughout the 19th century, more and more townsfolk moved out of the troubled village, until only a handful of stubborn settlers were left at the turn of the century. By the 1930s, the town was all but deserted, its old houses crumbling vestiges of a miserable past, the implacable woods reclaiming the ground that was once theirs. There's one more account of a man moving into Dudleytown, enraptured with the idea of solitude in the hills of Connecticut. He was a New York doctor named William Clark, and in 1937 he decided to make a holiday home near the old ghost town. It was a grave mistake. According to a local legend, he and his wife were vacationing near Dudleytown when the doctor was called in for an emergency. Clark went back to New York for 2 days, 48 hours, all the time it took for the town of Dudleytown to work its dark magic. When Dr. Clark returned, he found his wife huddled in the upstairs bedroom, babbling incoherently about the creatures in the woods. Whatever events had transpired when Clark was gone, they were enough to have driven his wife completely mad. He got her all the help he could, but to no avail. A few weeks after her 2 day stay in Dudleytown, Mrs. Clark had committed suicide. No one has lived in Dudleytown since. Today, many theories are offered in an attempt to explain the history of the cursed town. The rationally minded emphasize concrete factors. Mohawk Indians are said to be responsible for the disappearance of people and livestock. A high lead content in the water or the consumption of tainted rye is believed to have caused the high incidence of insanity. Others, however, have different theories. Referred to as a dead zone by some researchers, Dudleytown is said to be situated in a negative energy zone, one of many on the planet, which are able to attract an inordinate number of negative spirits. There's also the legend of the Dudleytown curse, which tells of an ancient hex placed on the Dudley forefathers in the 16th century for their roles in the attempted overthrow of King Henry VIII. It is believed that the town inherited this curse from the three Dudley brothers, who gave the town its name. Gideon, Barzillai, and Abiel moved into town in 1753. The people who expounded this supernatural theories point to the strange occurrences that continue today, mentioning the heavy feeling in the air, the unnatural silence of the woods, and the bizarre figures occasionally spotted in forests. One famous account has a local television crew filming a black silhouette emerging from the stone foundations of one of the ruined houses. Other people walking through the area tell of the strange feeling that the ground was somehow grabbing onto them, disabling any movement. All this disagreement has turned the abandoned town into something of a controversy. Have natural, inexplicable forces ruined Dudleytown, or are there darker, supernatural explanations for what has transpired there? Either way, one can still sense the oppressive air of tragedy that hangs in the branches of the dark hills, can almost feel the loss, pain, and heartache that consumed so many early Americans who settled in the Doom Town so many years ago.